All right, well, here we go on now to chapter 2, which is on ethics. Now, when we hear that word ethics, I think it's one of those words, it's important that we begin by having a clear definition of what we are talking about. The definition I use in public speaking, at least, is that it is where I'm presenting someone else's work as if it were my own. I think that works pretty well. The textbook, though, says let's take a bigger picture and talk about it more from a philosophical point of view first. And so they provide this definition. Ethics is the branch of philosophy that deals with the issues of right and wrong in human affairs. And the key words you want to take away from that are right and wrong. That's a moral aspect. There are certain things that we ought to do, or there are certain things that we ought not to not do, right? And then the opposite, there are certain things we should not do or we should not stop from doing because they are good and right and the good thing to do. Okay, so that's the bigger idea. And we could talk about, I offer a couple of thoughts, if you're hungry, is it okay to steal bread to survive? That's a whole philosophical area. But we are taking that idea of right and wrong and applying it to our presentations. How does ethics show up in public speaking? And just so you know, it shows up all the time because we are expressing ideas and thoughts from ourselves to other people, and how we go about doing that can have huge ethical ramifications. So I want you to be thinking ethically when you're developing your speeches. Okay, so number one, guidelines for ethical speaking. First of all, make sure that your goals are ethically sound. Meaning, if you're trying to inform me about the Statue of Liberty, great. If you're trying to persuade me that I should vote at the next election, fantastic. But if you're going to try to persuade me to unethically hurt other people, that would not be a good goal of persuasion. So make sure that what you're trying to accomplish is fair, reasonable, good, and beneficial. Second, be honest in what you say. So honesty can be a very slippery item, but what it means is do your best that what comes out of your mouth is accurate and true. Now, sometimes people will just outright lie. They will tell you green is blue or red is orange. Oh, that's close. But they're just outright trying to deceive you for their own benefits in some way, or to your detriment. So obviously we don't want to do that. Another type of dishonesty is where we distort the facts. We don't tell the whole story because it isn't beneficial to us. Now, I'm a great Law and Order fan, and I will notice in Law and Order they will comment sometimes and say, well, it's not the prosecution's job to make the case for the defense or vice versa. So I get that. But in our public speaking, normally we want to give a fair hearing to both sides of the perspective, even if we don't agree. Tell us the perspective and then tell us why it is a weak argument and why you don't agree. I think that's a more well-rounded speech when you share both sides and why you favor one side over the other. Exaggeration can be dishonest, that we are overstating the case, and not just for emotional purposes or for entertainment purposes, but we are exaggerating something that's not true to try to get people to agree with us on a false understanding of the reality. They also talk about avoiding name calling and seeking to wound other people. In persuasion, they will talk about I'm blanking out right now, I'll come back to that later, but there is a method of destroying the other person, ad hominem, thank you, Neil, I told myself, where we attack the person, and the person may have nothing to do with the situation. Now, sometimes the person does have something to do with the situation, but quite often it's the case they carry, and we figure, well, if we can destroy the proponent of that point of view, then the people won't like the person, but then in the process they may not like the idea either, and they won't vote for something because this person votes for it and we don't like him, therefore we don't like his idea. But we know that somebody can be a rat but still have a good policy or a good idea that we would agree with the item, but not the character of the person. So we want to focus on the name thing. And don't use abusive language. It's just no good. Your audience is going to become uncomfortable, and they're not going to appreciate you being abusive to others. Now, I read that in political campaigns, there is more tolerance for the process by people of one candidate kind of name calling and tearing down their opponent. There is more latitude given in that kind of realm. But in general, it is not a beneficial thing to do. Put your ethical principles into practice. If you're for something that you're expressing in your speeches and out of your mouth, do you live it? Is it the common practice? Is there consistency between the two? Because if your audience finds out you're saying X, but you're living Y, and they don't match, they're going to see that as something that they're not in favor of, in that consistency and that hypocrisy. Okay, let's talk about plagiarism. Plagiarism, as I said, is presenting work that is not your own. That's the practical application of ethics. And there are different modes of plagiarism. First of all, there is global plagiarism. That is where you take somebody else's work, scratch off their name, fill in your name, and present a speech or a paper as if it was that you did the work behind it. Straight out dishonesty. Second is patchwork plagiarism, and sometimes we get into this, not so much on purpose, but we get a little bit from this person, and a little bit from this person, and a little bit from this website, and a little bit from this video, and we kind of put them together, and it's almost like Frankenstein speeches. That none of it's ours originally, but we just kind of put the pieces together, and sometimes without giving credit where credit's due. So again, we present it as if it were ours. There is incremental plagiarism, where, what did I write here? We just don't want to put in the work. Oh, excuse me, incremental plagiarism is where we borrow sections of other people's work, but here's one of the biggest problems. Quite often, we just don't want to put the work in. We don't want to work so hard, so we just allow other people's work to kind of drift into ours. But here's the solution. Even if you don't mean to do it, sometimes it happens, but give good citations. In our speeches, what we call inline or in-text citations, this is where we are giving credit where credit is due. A typical example would be this. According to Kathy Smith, in her book, in her 1995 book on public speaking, How to Give a Great Speech, she says you give a great speech by preparing and practicing a lot. Okay, so that's made up. But notice I'm giving 4 pieces of information. Number 1, who said it? That is, who's the person who put that thought together that gets credit. Number 2, where they said it. They say it in a magazine, online, in a book. Was it a quote that you got from a video? But tell us where. And by the way, if it's an article, just tell us the name of the article. You don't need to tell us also the name of where the article was presented. Maybe it's beneficial, but usually we just want the name of the article, or the name of the book, or the name of the video. Third, tell us when was it done, said, printed, etc. Now, this becomes important. Sometimes it's not. In mathematics, I don't know. I'm assuming mathematics does change, but things between 1950 and 2020, there may not be that much of a change. 2 plus 2 is still 4, if I am correct. But especially in the areas of science and technology, the changes that have taken place. I just watched a special the other day on the technology behind going to the moon. And I've always been fascinated with that, how the V-2 rockets used by World War II Nazi Germany, especially against England, shooting things across the channel, that technology was then used in creating the rockets that went to the moon. Von Braun, who was the leader in Germany with the V-2 rockets, came over here and led the race to the moon technology-wise. But things change, and the rockets we used back then are not the same rockets that are used by the, I'm blanking out on the name of the group that just went to the space station. Not Tesla, that's the car company, but you get the, you know, the idea. It's all different now. It's all changed. It's gotten better. So you want to give us the dates for science material and technology and how the two overlap, because things are changing all the time. An article about electric cars from 1980 may be completely irrelevant in 2020. So use the new stuff, but tell us where it's from so we can then evaluate, is that too old? Is there something there that's interesting because it was, you know, 100 years ago, but the same idea still persists? The fact that the first cars were electric cars, then went to fossil fuels, and then now we're back to electric cars again. So what has changed in the process? But give us the date, and then finally tell us what they said, either in a paraphrase or a quote. And the general rule is, if it's short, give us the quote. If it's longer, give us the paraphrase. Don't read a long quotation. Now, I think there is, in my opinion, if the quote is so well said by the original person, it's probably worth giving us the whole thing. Not too far, but give us more than you normally would, because the wording is so amazing and beautiful and wonderful and impactful that we would lose something in a paraphrase. And here's what I would do. I would now always write down quotes on a card, and even a little bit of showmanship maybe, that when you're going to read a quote, you take the card, you make it clear that you're reading from the card, because the audience says, oh, I noticed he used notes before, now he's reading from a card. It points it out and emphasizes it. Second, maybe take this card out slowly, but just make sure they know you're using a card and you have the quote written on there. It helps, and then just read it. Don't worry so much about eye contact when you're reading a quote, because you want it to get it accurate, you want to get it right, and the audience will appreciate that you took the time with that. A paraphrase, you can say it out loud, you don't have to read it like a quote, but you get the idea. You want people to know that this is a quote. You don't have to memorize it, I guess you can, but you can read it, and I think there's value in that experience of doing it that way. Maybe that's just me. Okay, and then also a minor thing. When you say, according to the book, I would say not written in 2015, but published. Because somebody might have written something a long time ago, but it's when it becomes available to the audience that you can read it. I think that's the significant date normally. So I would, again, am I going to mark somebody down for that? No, but published sounds better to me. Notice how picky I can be on that kind of those items. Okay, what about plagiarism and the internet? Well, the biggest thing to me is, anytime, day or not, you can order up a speech. Don't have to prepare it. Just order it, and you can download it and then practice it a few times and present it, and I may never know. And you may get a good grade because you did that. But you have to live with yourself. Maybe this is the pastor part of me. You have to live with yourself knowing that you were dishonest in your academic integrity. So I would say don't do that, obviously. But a few other things. Number one is, when you're speaking, be courteous and attentive to your speaker. But then also, we want to flip this around now, as far as when I think about courtesy and being attentive to listening. Ethics in listening. Now, we're going to have a whole chapter on listening. We're not going to do that today or anytime soon. But listening. Number one, when you want to be a ethical listener. Be attentive and courteous to the speaker. And it's got to be both. Don't just be attentive in the sense of paying attention and not doing something else with your phone, but you're still not paying attention, you're just staring at them. And you're being courteous but not attentive. And being attentive and not courteous means that you're closing your eyes. You can listen well. The speaker doesn't know that. All they know is you're falling asleep. So courteous and attentive. Even if you don't agree with them. Even if you coming in, you know you're not going to agree with what they're going to say, at least give them your attention during the time, excuse me, they are speaking. Second, don't prejudge the speaker. Even if you think you know what you're going to say, even if you're probably going to be right, at least give them the time. Maybe they changed their minds since the last time you heard them. Maybe it's going to be different than what you expect, but don't prejudge. When they're done, and judging meaning in a positive way of evaluating, not just condemning outright, and judging and rejecting before we even heard what they had to say. And then third, we want to support the free and open flow of ideas. We don't all have to agree. There's a lot of things that I think maybe you don't agree with, and vice versa. But it means we still want to allow people to express their thoughts, their feelings, even if, in our opinion, they are dead wrong. We know they're wrong. And there are probably things that people give in speeches that I say, that is just nuts. But I try to listen. I try to grade based on the presentation, not on whether I agree with the content or not, right? And we want people to be able to share their ideas openly. And if we start judging and condemning right off the bat, people will be less prone to share their ideas with others. So we want to support them to share. But again, sharing doesn't mean agreeing. It just means allow them to speak, and everybody has their own perspective. So that is it on ethics. It's kind of it's an important element, but it's not really still into the technical parts of how to present. That's going to be coming up. So let's end that here. Thank you.